Now, what's up, you guys? Welcome to Startup Mindsets episode 15. Our guest today is none other than Ramphis Castro. Ramphis is currently a VC for ScienceVest, and he has a history of entrepreneurship. Welcome to our podcast, Ramphis.
Thanks for the invite, Dan. Good to be here, Earl.
Yeah, and of course, and I guess this is Earl for people listening, and Ramphis and I know each other for many, many years, right? We built this impact platform kind of before called Align 17, and I think since that time we went to many different iterations of our career. But Ramphis is one of my really good friends, and I think we're totally mission aligned in how to change the world through technology and science. So. Thank you, Ramphis, for saying yes, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. Ramphis, yeah, I'd love to hear your take on when you got started in entrepreneurship. Was this always your thing, or was it forced, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So I'm originally from, Guayama, Puerto Rico, right? I mean, English as a second language by itself is not really a thing generally. So, and where my parents, where they grew up and we all grew up, I guess entrepreneurship is sort of embedded in sort of way of life. Right? I mean, just kind of making ends meet and figuring out kind of new opportunities to offset some I guess life's costs. So I guess thanks to my mom and dad, I guess got started early in getting exposed to building something from nothing and solving someone's problem and getting paid for that. That's in a non-traditional sense, right? Not just like being an employee, but figuring out simple things like mowing a neighbor's lawn for 50 cents, right? Like all day, right? They just spending like all day doing that and getting 50 cents and being extremely excited to be able to afford bubble gum and stuff like that, or buying candy and reselling that to the other kind of neighborhood kids to kind of make some profit so that we could afford to go buy a plane ticket so we could make it to Disney over the summer, right? Like, kinds of things. I was lucky. I didn't know it obviously then that was kind of that kind of training for a lot of things that I would do after. But definitely that's where the sort of mindset, attitude towards work and solving problems and in the service of others, that's where that I felt kind of that came through, kind of just experiencing my parents and my mom specifically, just figuring out kind of new opportunities to supplement additional income. But really it took a long time for me to figure out that was the path, or my chosen path, right? I mean, I started, and when you're from where I'm from, you can be one of three things: engineer, lawyer, or doctor. And I made 2 out of 3. I'm an engineer first. So I lucked out in being sort of good at math and science, had access to English as a second language because of sort of my mom's and my dad's investment in us sort of learning kind of early, and had the opportunity to study engineering and start my career at Microsoft, right? So that's sort of the path, right? So going from where I'm sort of from into engineering, and then not knowing anything about startups or building companies in that regard, but then seeing how products were built inside Microsoft and deciding if I was going to be an engineer, then might as well be an engineer back home. So I kind of turned down my Microsoft offer, came back to Puerto Rico, and then started solving some problems there from the private sector that were public sector issues, and then over time learning that there were better ways to generate wealth, all right, by solving problems and accruing that and learning more about just what startups were and how to build them. So it took until my kind of early 20s to really kind of start my first actual kind of startup.
Yeah. What was the first startup that you started? Was it
that was civil engineering. So a long time ago, but basically the story was I had been exposed to building products at Microsoft. I thought, oh yeah, sure, I could kind of do this. I kind of done this before, but at the time in Puerto Rico, there weren't really that many product tech companies, right? Not really a thing. It was more service-oriented businesses broadly, and I went into the idea of starting a business thinking, well, the things I do in consulting for large-scale companies that was doing that all over the region and for bigger industries or sort of bigger companies, I could do that at sort of small scale and just sort of make more money. So that was sort of the idea, right? I had all this experience around integrating kind of, enterprise resource planning, ecosystems, sort of systems, and designing custom, analytics. I mean, we call them kind of AI now, but it was sort of expert systems for different companies as well, and just bringing that small scale. That's sort of where I thought. And when we went to our very first customer, he's like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't need any of that, right? I have this problem. And the problem that they had was it was really difficult for hospital administrators to figure out and how do they know what's happening at any given moment with their budgets, right? And their relationship with insurance companies was very difficult because they had better data than they did about what was going on and who's getting paid. I ended up solving for that problem, right? And building a product to make it easy for hospital admins to understand what they're up to. And this is early, mid 2000s, right? So 2000s or 5, 6. So at the time, just sort of building a company focused on sort of healthcare analytics and, building a way to just aggregate data from what was going on and basically say, hey, this is the right kind of doctors that are being very attentive to your patients, or this is sort of some of the patients that kind of need a different kind of help and your doctors are not serving them well, and this is why you're seeing them going to the emergency room, like those kinds of things. And from there, I mean, that the story, I mean, product worked, but they made all the mistakes on the business side. I mean, had partners that the start of the company, had to save it, and all kinds of other experiences there that informed then going again, building a second tech company, kind of that working out, and then moving on to the investor side.
Yeah. Well, that's a really cool journey. I'm just wondering, how was the ecosystem or the appetite for, I guess, innovation back in Puerto Rico, where you're from? Was it
So
a little bit, you had some hurdles just since, it's an emerging region?
Yeah. So at the time, keeping context, and a lot of things have changed since then there and everywhere else in the world. But the ecosystem, this idea of mentors and angel investors and VCs and people helping you for no reason other than to pay it forward, not really a thing. Right? Right?
It's true. Yeah.
So here I am, building the tech company, but there's no thing and no one around me to be helpful. Actually, the story at the time was there were all these sort of, and that was not just a Puerto Rico thing, it's everywhere, right? Even to this day, there are all these programs that are like for business support, but it's for traditional businesses, right? Not for building.
Yeah, they make you write the business plan that's like 50 pages, right?
I did that. I did that. I did that. And just seeing firsthand how basically everything that everyone said and did was not from experience of building companies, but was from seeing what they thought you needed to do to build a company, right? So a lot of consultants, a lot of service providers, but not real experience in actual building product tech companies. So that is why I got involved in a lot of ecosystem building work, right? From that first experience of seeing that all the things that were out there did not really apply to building an innovation-driven company outside of the major tech hubs, right? Like there are all these things about Silicon Valley, get your friends and family around. It's like, okay. Or, building, raising so you can build a product. When I started, we were profitable, day one, right? Profitable day one, product market, solving these issues. And yet there wasn't an ecosystem around to support or to pull from, right? It just lessons learned and advice. So that has evolved significantly since then, right? I've been involved in, I helped, I was the first Spanish speaking facilitator for Startup Weekend, early days. So this is like 2010, 2011, and helping that program scale and grow, right? Helping find more facilitators in Latin America and the Caribbean and elsewhere. Same thing for other programs like Founder Institute, and then evolving and designing my own program with the help of my colleague at the time, Marcos Polanco, to essentially take the best efforts around the Startup Chile program and making it work for the ecosystem that we're in, right? Specifically using an investor lens for making the commitments, for releasing the funds up front, just like a regular check, like a regular equity check, versus like more milestone driven payments and these kinds of things that different programs around the world use, right? They kind of make you write all kinds of documentation just to get, a tiny check. And that portfolio now has, Puerto Rico went from $0 in venture capital around 2015 to over, 100 million plus in venture capital follow-on funding from investors all over the world, right? New York, Silicon Valley. So there's a vibrant,
Yeah.
growing ecosystem of hundreds, if not thousands of startups now operating from Puerto Rico, not just Puerto Rican startups, right? This portfolio, there are companies from over 67 countries, half of which left operations. So now there's all kinds of everything there. It's a just as in any emerging ecosystem, there's a lot of challenges of doing business outside of just traditional tech hubs. But the entrepreneurship and the level, caliber, and scale of the talent is obviously there right now, proven. So it's less of a are there entrepreneurs, or can you build global tech companies from Puerto Rico, and more about who are the right kind of investors that get it right and can be supportive and help connect the dots for not just companies on the island, but also connected with other ecosystems in other parts of the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned 2015, sort of being that pivotal year in venture and I guess technology. I remember 2015 was very big in everything. Like, I think if I were to point in that decade, where things like really changed, I mean, so much has happened. What do you think accounted for that appetite for venture and the dollars being poured into not just Puerto Rico, but around the world? Like, how come 2015 VC fancied or the thing to do?
So it's not that VC fancied. Actually, VC has all kinds of problems, right? Yeah, the reason I got into VC is because your traditional VCs, suck, right? They're kind of more pattern matching on what they've invested in the past, and not really digging into the potential opportunity. Concrete example, I mean, the Chinese investment ecosystem and the Southeast Asian investment ecosystem came up from under the Silicon Valley's noses, right? So it's sort of an entire ecosystem of investing that rivals Silicon Valley. And so deals were there, but the investors cannot see that. And the same movie has played out in almost every major ecosystem around the world now. So it wasn't a Puerto Rico specific or VC specific thing. It was more of their entrepreneurs, right? And the entrepreneurs and the mentors and the advisors, people like me and others, where by then we had a lot of other relationships. I did the Kaufman Fellows program. I had done the sort of Y Combinator Fellows program, and there were a lot of other relationships around ecosystems over the world that you could pull into the island, right? And help everyone help each other, right? So that global ecosystem support was sort of took a while to develop. And at that stage, it was robust enough to not just attract, or for us to write the very first check in these kinds of programs like Pro 18, but really to attract other investors to go and travel there to see for themselves. And they weren't traveling necessarily because they were seeing the deals. They were traveling because, as a friend, you invite them, you say, hey, come on over.
Yeah, that's right.
But then you see that there's world-class everything there. And then the deals and the entrepreneurs speak for themselves.
So I guess, Ramphis, quick question. I like your point where I guess 2015, 2016, this ecosystems all over the world started to spring up because, I guess, entrepreneurs are getting smarter, doing kind of these Silicon Valley style deals. So obviously, some VCs have more experience. Some people went back to their home countries or heritage countries to really make an impact. I'm curious on your thoughts on, why, let's say, most VCs don't take chances on entrepreneurs, especially not from the same geography, if by definition VC is supposed to be risk capital, right? Like, what is your thoughts on that? Because it's a puzzle, right, for a lot of people who, unfortunately, not everybody can grow up in San Francisco Bay Area, right?
So this will be a gross generalization, but at the stages where most of the entrepreneurs are operating across most emerging ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
the gap between the type of investor that can raise a fund or is a part of a fund and what the entrepreneur's experience is at that level, the gap is too far. So you
Mm-hmm.
have traditionally minded private equity type individuals that are trying to bring that lens into the type of investing they do in their local regional ecosystems or even in major hubs as well. So they want to
Yeah, yeah.
see uh, they want to see some things in order for them to be able to generate conviction because they themselves have never built companies
More interesting. Yeah.
of that nature and under those circumstances. So the experience gap is too far, and there's these embedded power dynamics in capital, investing, and others where it's almost impossible to bridge that culture gap. We call it that kind of business building culture and finance culture gap. It's too far for there to be alignment. So investors, they can't really make the jump. So they can't generate conviction for themselves, right? They literally don't know how. They don't know how to
Mm.
evaluate whether, Plantina, let's say if you were based out of Philippines or like your company based out of Philippines, could you be successful, right? They don't understand the market conditions that will make that clear. They don't have
Yeah.
experience in doing that themselves. They don't have experience in managing that uncertainty themselves and building that in that way. So there's no way for them to say, well, we'll commit first, right? They can't believe because they can't see it and they haven't done it themselves. So it makes it this systemic issue that we're still experiencing. It's gotten 100 times better, as you know, Earl. Like you and I, we built all types of different models and supported funds and been invested in different ways where we bridge that gap. But the gap is systemic because of all these factors and many more.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point there, right? Just because I think, I think the gap is closing. I mean, there's some really, I mean, huge companies from, other parts of the world that they're now are entering, decacorn status, if not even IPO status, right? Like I think the biggest fintech IPO will be Ant Financial, right? Which is
Yeah,
I think nobody probably has invested. I don't know. I'm not sure who Silicon Valley company has in venture capitalists are in the cap table of Ant Financial, right? So
Yeah, I don't have it top of mind, but yeah, I mean,
exactly, right. That's exactly the thought process there.
yeah,
But Dan, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting. Just thinking about how you phrased everything. Just wanted to switch gears more into what made you start ScienceVest and I guess overall the fundraising process and maybe
yeah.
comment on that.
Yeah. So after my second tech company, and focusing on what I was sort of going to do next, and understanding that this access to capital gap issue is systemic, it's global, and thinking about where where can I add value and what could be something that I could dedicate and think about working in, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and looking for that mission, all these pieces coming together sort of in the mission alignment. That's how I arrived at sort of the science vest, the problems I wanted to solve with sciences, right? Which was the funding gap for science at the end of the day. If you're building an innovation driven company, generally super difficult. If it's technically in nature, uh, very difficult, right? So it has some core intellectual property. It's you're working not just sort of AI or things and stuff that people know, but computational biology or synthetic biology, and try to explain that to a VC that right doesn't understand, is not engineered themselves, or doesn't have the technical capacity to understand, and then you're solving for a problem that your investors has not experienced themselves, right? Globally, right? Issues around health, and access to health ecosystems. Then all of that coming together makes the funding gap for science extreme, right? So you have a lot of capital on one side for research, but then the companies that spin out, they have this thing called the value. So ScienceVest started as a way to solve for that funding gap for science, essentially being that first check that brings the science, so gives more confidence to the rest of the investor ecosystem around the core technology and the team alignment around the core technology, bringing this to market, and the path to market for the companies, so that it would make their life easier to raise, right, and have access to additional capital from a lot of other sources, right? So solving for all of that, that's sort of how ScienceVest got started. And we went through the YC Fellows program at the time, essentially to get some feedback from sort of the ecosystem around kind of this issue. And at the time, 2014, 2015, it was, AngelList had their syndicates and was open, and we're trying to share with everyone how the deal making and the dynamics of the deals were going to go private, right, and everything was not going to be public for all the reasons that are discussed within venture, and then that allowed us then to raise sort of a proof of concept fund to go and make these investments, right, and from there, we've made commitments in companies in Canada and across the U.S., most of which have ended up in Silicon Valley, right? Because when you think about the kind of investors that get it at later stages, there are going to be more West Coast facing, or more that sort of Silicon Valley thinking. But that very, very first check is extremely difficult to get, and we wanted to solve for those issues and be that kind of partner for entrepreneurs. Basically, the kind of investor I wish I had.
Okay.
When we're getting started.
Just wondering on that, how do you think, or how would you compare the fundraising process from being a founder versus being a investor in terms of angels?
Glad you asked that question, because the LP engagement and the fundraising process and the process of being a GP and raising a fund is not talked about enough, right? And the difficulty level from raising for a startup, from raising for a fund, is in multiple orders of magnitude harder, right? I would say 100x. And the reason it's harder is that the dynamic of the relationship with the capital is different, right? My investors in the fund and investors in any fund have a 10+ year relationship that they're committing to, and the returns on those dollars, it's not necessarily the similar return profile as investing in a startup, right? So if you invest in a startup, as an entrepreneur, you're making a promise of the future, of what the future will be and what's the wealth that you're gonna create and capture. And that could be 30x or it could be 0. So from the investor lens, everyone already has a mindset of portfolio, and that, you only need one of your 10 or 20 or 30 investments to return your entire fund. So that's very well known in that side of the world for entrepreneurs and VCs. That dynamic is clear. Versus for LPs, they have different needs, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all LP, right? Different LPs have different liquidity needs, time horizons, different stakeholder dynamics, internal, how they make decisions. So there's a lot of other factors and a lot of other geographic concerns and market condition concerns. There's a lot more going on. So as you're raising a fund, there's no way to know this upfront, right? Just as if you're a startup and you're raising with a VC, you don't know a lot about that, right? I first heard a VCs was a thing. I don't even know, how long ago, but nobody told me that you could do that, right? That there was someone that could invest in you and support what you were doing. So for the LP side, it's even more opaque, right? Who makes these commitments? Who can do that? Who can make a 10-year horizon invest, a 10+ year horizon investment, knowing that it's illiquid, they can't get it out, and that they're committing to a portfolio, a blind pool of companies that you as a manager will be investing in. So the dynamic ends up being a lot harder unless you share a lot of sort of networks in the space, but then you also use strategies around showcasing the investments you've made and how those works. And still, there's just, the dynamic is just completely different than what you're doing with traditional venture and entrepreneur relationship.
Gotcha. Yeah. How do you like wearing both hats?
What's better? I guess what's harder maybe. I guess that, right? What's harder, an entrepreneur pitching to a VC or a VC pitching to LP?
VC to LP is much harder. Right? It's much harder because as an entrepreneur, you have more control over what the way forward is. Right. So as an operator, you can build a company. Right. Your customer drives what you do. Right. So your mindset around who do you work for? It's clearly in the service of solving a problem for your customers. Very clear. as long as you're executing beautifully in that direction, the other parts, there are ways to figure those things out. In the context of being an operator, right, as a building a new fund or a GP of a firm versus just being a VC from like a principal or an analyst, or even a partner without the task of the LP relationships and fundraising side, there's not a lot of control that you have with that relationship, because you can have the track record, you can make the investments, you can showcase the types of companies that you've invested in, what you've returned, but you don't have a way to force or to make it so that it's an obvious choice that you're the right bet for them, because there are hundreds, not thousands, of other funds that they're also exploring as well. And you are also competing with everything an LP could potentially invest at that time that could provide the kind of risk-adjusted returns that you could provide, right? So it's just a lot more complex of an investment decision from different LP perspectives, and there's much less information on each one, right? So there's just a lot to unpack there versus a fairly straightforward entrepreneur experience of building a company where, as long as you're solving a problem in a way that's unique and your customers are compensating you for that, it's very hard to argue with that data, right? And investors can just decide if that's a fit or not for them and move on. And as an entrepreneur, you have a lot more options to choose from if you are performing as for your customers as you want, right? It's still difficult, right? Don't get me wrong. There's no such thing as an easy fundraise. There's a lot of context and nuance on those that you hear about in the news. It's not like, oh, Earl just started and he got into Techstars. Well, Earl has been, in the game for a while. So same thing for the startup, for other kind of startups that you hear about, but it's not like that for raising a fund, right? There are all these other pieces around, first-time fund, first-time manager, first-time thesis, and all of that is a sort of vicious cycle, chicken and egg situation that's systemically very difficult to get over, which Earl and I saw broadly as we were working on the marketplace that Earl alluded to earlier, where you have capital on one side from family offices and others, and fund managers on the other, and at the end it's trust in the middle that is missing, right? There's this trust for the capital to flow both sides, which are completely different set of interviews that we can discuss and unpack.
Yeah, totally interested in, just wanted to ask here, since we're writing a book called Startup Mindsets, and trying to figure out, I guess, how people looked at all these things. And you mentioned, really challenging things of raising a fund, your own fund, and then raising funds from, both sides of the street. I mean, if you had to recall, like, what was your mindset when you were raising the ScienceVest fund? And like, just, I guess that changed, but how did you feel, and how did you convince yourself that you were doing what you want? No, convince other people.
Yeah. So the North Star, I mean, from a startup mindset perspective, it's always around, what problem are you solving, and why are you doing this? Like, why am I doing this, and why should others care? And what can I showcase that I'm the one to do this, right? Just as any founder can share and be able to articulate that and showcase that. But at the end of the day, it's all about focusing on a problem that needs solving and serving, and who are you serving, and that your own conviction and mission on the why you're doing that is worth all the pain and suffering that you're going to go through to get to the other side, right? And in this case, entrepreneurs globally deserve a better investment experience. And if you're building a globally scalable company that's solving some of the toughest challenges in humanity that are affecting billions of people, I think you should have investors that just get it and are along the ride for being as supportive as they can, versus the experience right now where essentially the typical traditional VC, and these are brands that VCs built for themselves before even Earl and I were in the game, where they're just sort of sitting around waiting, right, to see how you do, right? Just show me, not right now. Let me see you get started. Let me see what you do here. Let me see there, because they can't generate conviction for themselves so that they can work for the entrepreneur, right? So for me to be in the service of entrepreneurs in that way is sort of a big driver, just because it's the most meaningful impact I could have personally, because I'm not going to build I'm not going to go around again and build out, a computational biology company and, an HIV vaccine company, right? But I can invest in them, support them, and connect them with the right individuals, resources, and investors along with us so that they can get to where they need to be, which just makes the world a better place without the cliche of making the world a better place by better compression algorithms. It's actually making a better place by increasing access to healthcare, right?